I'm Jordan Davidson. I'm 20 years old and am an incoming junior at American University. And I also have almost 2.5 years of sobriety from all substances, but my drug of choice was marijuana. Um, so kind of to just talk about my general experience, my first exposure to marijuana was funnily enough kind of in actually the most stereotypical way possible. I was working for a music festival, an independent music festival, and I had helped build the stage, helped do all this stuff, and I went and I traveled to the back of the festival, and there's literally a tent, and people were passing around a joint and playing music, like literally, like kind of this kind of almost movie. And that was, and I smoked a little bit, and that was my first experience. And only until recently have I really almost thought like that have played some role, like in kind of the idyllic vision that I had about what it was like to smoke weed. Oh my God, a music festival. Like literally when we talk about how it's not Woodstock weed anymore, I felt like I was at Woodstock. That's what I felt like in my first exposure. Um, you know, the interesting part of my story is how gradual the increase was, and then how sharp kind of the uptake in use and behavioral changes were. So that was when I was 15 years old in the summer of 2016. And moving forward, the first time, I drank alcohol was a year or something later. And I smoked weed kind of throughout, not really regularly whatsoever. Um, but then came kind of the spring of 2018. I was a junior in high school, and I had some emotional problems in high school. I'd like to consider myself a well-rounded person. And my parents have always been very pro like therapy and like talking about my problems. I had a lot of really bad bullying experiences in high school early on. I had some really toxic relationships in high school, and that combined with some stuff going on in my personal life led me to really kind of say, screw it, I can't handle this. And I actually began to weirdly actively start self-medicating. Um, I remember I had this thought in my head. I was sitting alone in my room one day, and I was smoking a marijuana vape, a THC vape, and I was thinking like, I just feel so much better. I feel so much better. I would rather confront my issues like this than not like this. And that was really the start of kind of my journey down that bad path. I had some friends along the way who were certainly addicted. I mean, certainly consumed pretty startling, and I think still do, amounts of marijuana. And it got to a point where I was smoking mostly for kind of concealment purposes, so that no one knew what I was doing. I was smoking the THC vapes that we talk about, the 99% potency. And I always find it interesting. The statistics say, oh, the average THC potency is like 55%. I one time smoked something that was 70-ish%, always 90% and above was what I smoked for potency. I mean, I'd never even seen something as low as 55%. Never in my life I've actually seen that. So I kind of don't actually know what people are even talking about when they say those statistics, although I'm sure it's like true. But so I was smoking around 96, 97% multiple times a day. And it got to a point where I would do anything. I would literally do anything for weed. One experience that I'll share today was just to kind of show, well, I'll share two kind of specific memories today that will just kind of show you like the jarring depth of how bad this was. One night I had a friend over actually who I'd met in Spain. I went to Spain for an abroad program a few years before, and he was visiting. and I ran out of weed basically. And my best friend at the time was basically my dealer, and he lived right behind me. Accessibility was very easy, and I didn't have any, and I would smoke every night before I went to bed, and I needed that. I hadn't for months smoked and went to bed sober. I mean, it was unconscionable to me. I mean, and I actually devised this crazy plan for my friend to go and for my best friend to drop off the weed at like 1 a.m. in the morning, for my friend from Spain to start running the sink so my parents wouldn't hear me sneaking out. My parents took away my phone for the night, but he had 2 phones. So I took his phone, go out the door. I text him when I'm going to shut the door so he knows when to turn on the sink so my parents don't hear it. And there's me, a 17-year-old, running across his lawn on like a Thursday night at 1 in the morning, just so I could take like 3 puffs of a marijuana vape. That was the mind state that I was in. And it was crazy. I mean, a normal person would just say, I don't want to say normal, but someone who didn't have a problem would just, okay, I'll get it on the weekend. Who cares? Right? I mean, that's how people who don't have problems do it. And, that should have been the big warning sign. And kind of the second story that I'll tell is I was actually one of my last times using. It got to a point where it was a problem for me, and my friends started to notice. And they tried to take away my vapes. They tried to hide them. I'd break into their rooms and just take them back. My girlfriend at the time was basically telling me it's either me or this. For me, kind of a bit of an ultimatum. And I decided that I wanted to quit. But one of the last times I used, I still was in that very active addiction. And I was sitting on my floor with these completely used up marijuana vapes, and I had a butane lighter, and I had a stripped iPhone charger that you can use to basically charge it up instead of a pen. And I had that, and I lit the side of it to get whatever dregs were on the side melted down. I held my nose because I would have thrown up from the smell of the taste of the butane. And then I had to hold my nose even longer and actually ingest take a hit of my basically mint jewel, which I was also addicted to, so that I wouldn't throw up from the taste. I mean, that's what I was doing. That is the extent of my problem. I mean, that is like, I really don't like using this term because I think it can be used derogatorily, but kind of like junkie behavior, what that is an addiction. So finally, on December 9th of 2018, I decided enough was enough. And I felt like a hollow human being. I felt like a shell of a person. I was literally dead inside. I like to say I didn't actually believe. I'm not a very religious, I wasn't a very spiritual person. I say now, I didn't believe that people had souls or spirits until I felt like I lost mine. That is how I really felt. I realized that there was a core part of me that was gone. I didn't know what it was. And I think it's what, I'd like to say it's what we kind of would call a soul. And I decided to get help. And I, thank God that my parents were supportive. And I told my mom, and I broke down crying. And I went to an outpatient rehab program and went to Narcotics Anonymous and stopped. And I got help for myself. And I was lucky that I got help. And because I have no doubt that I sometimes break down crying actually these days, even thinking if my marijuana use accelerated that quickly, I had fully planned on trying psychedelics and stuff like that in the future. Imagine where I would be. Imagine where I'd be if I dabbled with opioids, if I dabbled with psychedelics. I would be dead. I don't think I'd be here right now, and thank God I am. So, that's kind of a base, kind of level experience, view of what I went through. So yeah. And I recommend and this isn't so much of an action, and it's more of a mentality that I think people need to really grow to have and be able to tell themselves, if you are not fortunate enough to have somewhat people in your life who are telling you that you have a problem, you need to validate for yourself that you have a problem, and you need to hear from people like me that this is real. This is a serious thing, because the last thing I'd want to note about my recovery is related to this. The hardest thing in my recovery was actually telling people that I was addicted to marijuana. I said this, actually, I publicly said this for the first time, I don't know, a month or so ago, when I was talking with Kevin Sabet, but I'll say it again here. I would actually, when I would tell people, whether it was new friends I'd meet who I'd talk about my problems, or whether it was in Narcotics Anonymous, I would actually say, like, I'm Jordan and I'm an alcoholic and an addict, or I struggle with alcohol addiction and marijuana addiction. And the reason I would say that is because I was embarrassed to feel like, because I did struggle with alcohol. Like, when I didn't have marijuana, I would drink as a kind of replacement, but it wasn't my main problem, right? I would choose marijuana every day. I was embarrassed to say that because I thought it wasn't a real problem. Like, society told me I was the one, the stoner, who was arguing marijuana addiction isn't real. So know that it's a real problem. There are people like me and people everywhere who struggled with it. And that's a real problem. So that's the first thing. Last two things is, if you have someone in your life who you think will be supportive, seriously reach out. You have to ask for help. I mean, the thing that saved my life was asking my mother for help. I said, I broke down and I said, I need help. I can't do this alone. It's almost embarrassing. I lasted a day. It's kind of funny. I told my mom, I think on December 10th, I literally lasted a day where I felt like I could stop smoking weed by myself. I got to a point where I was like, I can't do this. Like, I need my mom. I need my parents. I need support. And so I'd say reach out to someone. That's the second thing. A last piece of advice that I would give to someone who is struggling is to not be afraid to go to a 12-step meeting. I have experienced in my own life, so my mom and my mom's family has struggled with a lot of addiction. So we're very familiar with kind of like 12-step meetings. And my mom was the one who told me to go to a 12-step meeting and kind of dragged me there, because I heard Narcotics Anonymous and I was like, I don't use narcotics. Like, what is, that's ridiculous. And so, but I went, and it was phenomenal, and it was life-changing for me. And I know people who do struggle, friends of mine in college, and they're really hesitant to go to a 12-step meeting. They don't know if they'll fit in. They don't know if they'll like it. Kind of maybe they're excuses, maybe they're genuine concerns. But I'd say throw yourself into that environment, because in the first meeting, you will know if you really feel like you have a problem or not. Because if you are an addict, the things that people will say in that room, you will be like, whoa. Like, that resonates. Like, whoa. There are some people like my dad who doesn't struggle with addiction, who have heard some of the things in that room. He's been like, I don't really get that. Like, why would you feel that way, right? He doesn't get it because he's not an addict. Someone who is going to be like, oh my God, I totally, whether they're a heroin user, a meth user, an alcoholic, a marijuana, everyone has the same emotional experience. So that would be my third suggestion. The answer to that is yes and no. I consider myself like lucky enough to have gotten, so far in my addiction that I didn't lose like all my friends. Like, my friends were still there with me. I certainly alienated people. I certainly pushed people away. But the people who really were the ones who actually got me help were the friends who stuck with me. So in that way, like, my best friends in the world have been friends with me years before even my addiction. But other than that, like, yeah, totally. Because there was a friend who I've known since kindergarten, who I haven't seriously spoken to in over 2 years. And it's not because he's not a nice person. It's not because he's a terrible guy. he has a problem, and he helped me get what I needed and introduced me. And it just was a relationship I had to cut off. And he's still a nice person, but it's just not something I could entertain. And then there were other people, like my actual dealer, like my serious dealer. I haven't talked to in years. I mean, it was a total using relationship. These aren't good relationships. These aren't like love-filled relationships that people who are addicts and people who help deal drugs or share drugs. It's all about what you can get from one another. I mean, I don't consider myself some like manipulative person, but in active addiction, everyone is. Everyone is to some degree. So I acted like the guy was my best friend. What did I really want? He would give me free stuff. That's what I wanted, And so those, and same for me, he wanted my money, So in that case, yes, I did have to definitely cut a few people off.
Jordan, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Yesterday, I was talking with some drug prevention people in a meeting that was fentanyl and the fentanyl deaths. I live in Arizona, where it's a severe problem here. There's so much of it traveling through the state, and mostly younger and younger people that are dying from fentanyl, from the manufactured fake pills. Yes. And I asked, the whole entire meeting was about fentanyl. I asked if marijuana is like marijuana just overshadowed by this and it's not important anymore. And the answer I got, oh no, that's where the kids get the fentanyl, is from their marijuana dealer. They've been using marijuana. They have a dealer. They have a drug dealer. And that's where they're getting the fentanyl. So my question for you is, would you have been able to get other drugs, harder drugs, different drugs from your dealer?
So again, that's another yes and no answer. This is where I kind of, I kind of struggle to like understand everyone's experience. So in my experience, so the guy who I lived with at home, who was kind of gave me stuff, no, like, they weren't, maybe these days he's into other stuff, but at least when we were in high school, it was kind of just weed and alcohol. And when I was in high school, because I did go to a boarding school. So when I say home, I mean in like Connecticut, and then boarding school being New Hampshire. So when I was at school, I probably could have. This is the difference in the relationship. I think the real danger becomes when people start to venture outside of a high school pot dealer. When people, most people, right, my age, like with my experiences, don't have the same recovery experience. I got sober in high school, so from my experience, if we're being real here, high school pot dealers usually aren't like fentanyl dealers, right? They're like 15-year-olds who might like to smoke weed, who just want a little extra cash. Like that's like seriously what they are. When you get to college though, and when you get past college, because I know people, like that's when it gets more serious. When you get to the age of 18 and you're going off to college, or you're going off working, living on your own, and you start to encounter serious dealers, like, yeah, totally. I mean, because people who smoke, people who use heroin, like don't only necessarily use heroin or fentanyl. They might also smoke weed. It's like those dealers will have that stuff. So I don't have as much personal experience with that, but it's absolutely a possibility, especially for older people, especially for people in college. They get dealers in the city that they live in. And who knows? It's oftentimes friends, I find. Friends, like cocaine in college is so prevalent. I mean, people, I was talking this year, like so many people I know, like just started doing cocaine. And I was like, what? Like, what just happened? Like, really? I'm like, I literally have been in rooms where people are just doing cocaine. And I'm like, okay, like how'd that happen? Like where did that kind of come from, So absolutely there's access to harder drugs. For sure, especially with marijuana use. Yeah.
Another question about the dealers to teenage. Do you think teenagers are at risk of being introduced into dealing themselves? That here, I've got some free stuff for you if you can find more kids to bring to me. Does that happen?
Yeah, I don't. So I never got to a point where I dealed really myself. But I mean, that's kind of how it works, right? Like most people aren't. Um, from my knowledge and intuition, at a young teenage level, I don't think it's kind of like people being as predatory, saying, "Hey, come and work for me." I think that's more like if you're like getting older and in your 20s. But what does happen is the kids, right, will get exposed to marijuana. And so they'll start smoking marijuana themselves. And oftentimes, the heavy smokers make the logical conclusion that if they start selling some stuff, they'll make more money and they can buy more marijuana themselves. And it gets to a point when their marijuana habit is basically free, right? Because they're making enough money to support their habit. That is what I see very often. And oftentimes it's friends, oh, my friend deals. How do I, oh, can I start dealing stuff in my area? The guy I knew had friends in Maine and next to New Hampshire, and he got stuff from Maine. He would drive up to Maine. He would come back and get stuff from Maine. He would sell enough and he could smoke some of it. And it's kind of like supporting the habit. And that is one of the other ways where addiction is so pervasive, because it's the addiction that makes you feel the need to sell drugs, for many people. Yeah. You
And
know, I don't know if I can really answer that question. I wouldn't really see why not. If I'm being honest, I haven't really thought of it like that. But from what I saw in people, I mean, you're 16, 17, 18 years old and you're making a lot of money.
mhm, mhm,
You're making a lot of money and you're getting free drugs. So
mhm,
I don't see why it couldn't, for sure, especially in people with like the disease of addiction or addictive behavioral tendencies, and people who already have that, right? Like maybe that's another rush. I haven't personally experienced it, but I don't
and- and-
think that's unrealistic. So that's a really interesting question. The truthful answer is I don't know. The answer that I in logically would come to would say a mix. Um, I It didn't really make sense to me why my dealer had to go to Maine to get the stuff, until I realized that Maine legalized in 2016. Um, and I didn't know if it was just friends, but I remember hearing him say things like they get like legit stuff from Maine, like real stuff, like legit stuff, legal products that somehow kids would obtain, and then import, I guess, across state borders from Maine to New Hampshire. And I would get it from there. So I'm sure I did consume some real products, or legal products as an underage, smoker. In other cases, I'm definitely sure a lot of it was black market. I mean, the black market, I think, was active and definitely was even still active in Maine. I mean, I'm sure a lot of the stuff this guy got from Maine was also like black market stuff. Like just remembering what they even looked like. Like I know some of it I think was legit, and some of it just definitely wasn't. You just know by the labeling. So for sure, from the legal state, underage kids were getting certainly a mix. And I guess that's the message probably to get across, that, underage kids can have access to legal products and the black market still kind of survives. So that would be my answer. I was, so that's how I started.
right.
I definitely did. And when I like smoked the flower, I smoked more of like the bud or the flower, toward the beginning of my use, mainly kind of when I was a junior in the spring of my junior year in high school. And the reason for that was, I kind of started smoking, going from really not smoking at all to smoking on the weekends. And I wasn't smoking every single day when I first started, right? And so I would have friends who would have the stuff, and we could go take a long walk out to the woods where no one would see us and kind of just smoke it there. And so in that way, it was easy for me. Now, when I got into my addiction, right, I was in a dorm, I was around people. When I was home, I was with my parents. The one time that I did actually smoke like weed, like the bud in my dorm, everyone smelled it and came to my room actually and was like, Jordan, everyone smells you're smoking. And I was like, what? I actually, it's so ridiculous. And this is the thing, like you can smoke out of anything. I was smoking out of a plastic kazoo. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely insane. I literally was smoking out of a kazoo. It's because that's what I had to use. It was crazy. Anyway, but yeah, I really used the vapes literally out of, first of all, got you way higher. And it was out of convenience. It was pure convenience. I mean, I could literally hide it. And when I wasn't smoking only on the weekends anymore, guess what? I didn't want to make the effort to grab a few friends and organize a time and go out back into the woods where no faculty would see us and, have a tough time spilling like kind of bud everywhere and like all that stuff. No, like I wanted to sit in my room alone. Like my use was 90% of it was alone. I was not like, this was not an activity. Like if I had friends that would partake, that was awesome. But like, I was also like, I knew it wasn't like, my friends knew it wasn't normal, so they didn't want to always do it with me. My friend who was my still a really great friend today, who I kind of actually introduced, unfortunately, to weed, doesn't really have a problem. He's totally normal, good kid. But he told me the moment he realized I had a real problem, was when I had to go to a class, and he stopped me in the hallway and looked at me and looked at my eyes, which were like, I guess probably really glassy or red, and basically asked me like, are you stoned? And I lied to him and said no. And I was. And so he was like, the moment that you started lying to me, I started realizing like, why are you lying? So it was just out of convenience because I could just do it before class, do it wherever, I can do it anytime. So you literally wouldn't actually need to have any, they essentially can be smokeless, because you can do this thing, the cool term for it is you can zero it. And so it's called zeroing it because it's zero smoke. So basically you can do this with like any actual smokable product. You inhale it and you can literally keep breathing small breaths in until you get to the point where it's actually like dissolved in your lung, dissipated in your lungs. And so when you breathe out, you're just breathing out air. There's no smoke. So all the smoke actually stays trapped inside your lungs, in your body. So you can literally smoke and not actually exhale any smoke. So it's as smokeless as you can basically get, and as odor. And if you do exhale, you just wave it away and it's gone. No one smells it. That's probably the absolute most important thing, is what to tell parents. I'd like to say like parents should have a zero tolerance policy towards antipathy. Like that's what I'd say. I really give pretty much every single ounce of credit to my parents. And you know what, like I won't be like, just because I'm sharing my experience, I know everyone has different like parenting styles. If that's okay, I'm not going to be really nuanced in my opinion because I have a pretty firm opinion about how parents should deal with drugs. And it's basically the exact way my parents did. I'm really against the kind of any like fear tactics, any zero tolerance policy in the way of like from a young age saying, if I ever catch you with drugs, like you're done. If I ever catch you smoking weed, like you don't know the amount of trouble you're going to get in. Like, that kind of mentality, I swear to God. And even some parents are like, if you shouldn't do drugs because if you ever need help, I'm not going to be there for you. Like, I'm not going to be there to call. Like, if you need to, like, I actually have a friend who literally told like their parents raised them. Like, I'm not, like, if you're ever out and having a tough, like, too bad, like you're the one who decided to use drugs. I really think the most compassionate approach is the best approach. I fully believe that in policy and in culture, we should not be normalizing drugs. But I'd be an idiot to think that kids aren't going to smoke weed. Kids may always smoke weed. Now, can we dwindle that number down? Can we make it as safe and open and communicative as possible? Yeah, that's a more realistic goal. And so I think that parents should inform their children, in a kind of, I'll say, in a kind of normal, like compassionate way, the real evidence about smoking and about using drugs. Tell your kids that marijuana is an addictive substance. Tell them it's an addictive substance and that it's not so different than alcohol. You can't become addicted to marijuana, but you can be an alcoholic. No, it's a problem substance. And then what else I would say is to say, hey, this is something that we're not going to encourage. We're going to discourage you do, but I want you to be as open and honest with us about what you're doing. Because the worst thing possible would be for, Cheryl, you were saying your son was, made it almost a game to see how, like, if he could get high and kind of just like be in front of you, right? I did a similar thing with my parents. Mm-hmm. And I think if kids can be as open and honest as possible and their parents say, hey, just let us know what you're doing. And if you ever have a problem, tell us and we'll get you the help that you need. Two things. So number one, I've already shared my experience about going to my mom for help. And the reason I went to my mom for help almost the day that I felt like I needed to stop was because my mom raised me in that environment. Was because she said, we're going to be compassionate. If you need help, we're going to help you. We're not going to punish you. We're not going to tell you you're a bad person. We're going to get you the help and support that you need. And the second experience that I'll say is another similar one, which I think is a really positive reflection. My mom one time said, and full disclaimer, I drove, under the influence all the time. Like I would drive stoned, like when I was home, like on a daily basis. I regret it. I think it's like one of the worst things you can possibly do because you don't know who you'll harm. I think it's a terrible thing to do. And I really feel like terrible about having done that, but I did it. And my mom told me when she knew that I was smoking with that friend who I'd mentioned before, who lived in my neighborhood. And she told me, Jordan, be honest with me. Are you going to smoke when you're over there? Because if you're going to smoke, I don't want you taking the car. I would rather you tell me that it's going to happen and don't take the car. Now, I was in no place to say, yes, mom, I'm going to go and smoke. But I was in a place to say, but I felt comfortable enough saying, I'm not really sure, so I'll just keep it safe and walk. And I knew I was going to, but my mom saying, Jordan, just be real with me. Tell me what you're doing so that you can be safe. If she hadn't raised me like that, I would have easily taken the car. I would have felt very comfortable myself taking the car. But because she told me that, I didn't take the car. And who knows, maybe I could have gotten in a car accident and died, right, if I took the car. So in that way, that's a reflective experience of how I think parents should really treat their kids. Be open, be honest, say, let me know what you're doing. Don't lock them up and say, you can't ever see that friend again, because they're going to. Kids find crazy ways to do everything. So at least let them be honest about it. And that's the number one thing, communication with your kids in a positive way. So going back, one last remark on parents, on any advice to parents, really know what to inform yourself on, what to actually do. If your child comes to you or you notice these behaviors, listen to to people who have experienced addiction. I personally say this. I think every single person should go to an AA or NA meeting before they die, because for anyone who's gone to one of those meetings, of course they're helpful to people with addiction. They have something like above 40% success rate, which is incredible. But literally the stories in there and the messages in there could help everybody. Everybody could benefit because it's applicable to all life. Or even something like, I would recommend parents even go, if it's an open meeting, to something like an Al-Anon, or something like an Every Brain Matters, right? Like meetings like these, where you can hear people like me, where you can hear people like Sally, like Aubrey, like Cheryl, everyone who share these experiences. That's what I'd say to do, even if it's just once or twice. So you can really understand if your child comes forward, what those behaviors look like before they happen. And if something happens like I did with my mom, what to do next immediately. So like for sure, two things. So number one, for sure, just like some general paranoia. Like I had like one really crazy, like one weird experience where like I was smoking with this person and we went out for like we thought like cops were following us, and we literally thought everyone. There were actually like a few seriously weird coincident, like crazy like things that like that actually did happen that might make someone reasonably paranoid, but like the being high just made me like freak out. Another experience, I will say there was one really terrible experience that I did have. I smoked with like some friends, and one of my friends started to like in retrospect, I think he was just being silly. He started to talk in these like different voices, like accents or something. He started to just be like goofy, right? But my friend and I, who were kind of best friends with him, kind of left the room, and we were really high, and we convinced ourselves that this kid, we were like, oh my God, like it all makes sense. Like he has multiple personality disorder. He's a psychopath. Like he's insane. And I swear to God, we went in my friend's room and we locked the door and we went in the corner. And these are like two 16-year-old, 17-year-old boys holding each other for dear life, convinced that our best friend was going to come in with a knife and murder us. I swear to God, I was convinced I was about to be murdered. Like, wow. I mean, it was like it was like one of my best friends just being an idiot, you know? And we actually thought he was like mentally ill. And I was shaken up afterward. I mean, I was seriously shaken up. It was crazy. And like, I mean, obviously it was the weed. I wasn't, you know, like I just smoked way too much and I got so paranoid and I got freaked out. And I know other people have similar experiences. I know people have way worse experiences than that. I mean, we know what marijuana does in regard to paranoia, in regard to other things like schizophrenia. I mean, we know all this stuff mentally that it does, but those are just two of my and I had other paranoia, just like, you know, just feeling a bit paranoid generally, but those were two experiences that stuck out where it was like affected me, like it like had, you know, really took over.
Jordan, something you said, this isn't a question, just a comment, but something you said really caught my attention. You're familiar with my son's suicide note?
Yeah.
It said, marijuana killed my soul plus ruined my brain. So when you said that about recognizing what you were losing your soul, I'm going, at first, I mean, it took me years of thinking about it. What did Andy mean about killing his soul? But I've come to understand it better as I've become a little more spiritual myself and understanding the spiritual world. And to hear you say that, it helps me understand better. Andy knew exactly what was happening. And the decision he made was, you know, probably the only decision he could make at that point in time. But he was 31 years old, and he had started using pot. I knew he did when he was around 13 or 14 years old. And I thought he did not use through high school. And I told people that for years, even after Andy's death. But his best friend told me just a couple of years ago, he said, no, we used it every day in high school. I can't believe that got by me. And that was back in the days. Yeah, he wouldn't have been vaping. I don't think there were vapes yet.
No, I don't think there probably were.
Yeah, so they were going somewhere where the odor wasn't there. I was in Al-Anon myself. I was married to Andy's stepdad, was a recovering alcoholic, and we had no drugs, no alcohol in our house. And Andy knew full well that I never would never would have been able to say, oh, it's just pot, go ahead. I mean,
Right.
he knew it had to be hidden. And I'm just amazed it got by me. So even someone who might be looking for it is, it's so easy for a teenager to get it past their parents. We're so busy. I think parents are so busy.
Yeah.
And
And you want to think the best, you want parents, I think parents want to think, and that's no fault to a parent. I mean, I'm not a parent, but I can only imagine, because I know from my mom, like, parents want the best for their kids. And I think that makes them maybe want to think the best. And kids find so many ways. I mean, Sally, your experience and my experience with my mom being blindsided, but your experience, I mean, about, how blindsided you can be. It's no fault of your own. It's like kids are like they find ways to do anything that they want to do. It's pretty like almost like miraculous. But I can't even imagine about Andy's experience. I felt like after, kind of a certain amount of months of seriously heavy marijuana use, years of using, but maybe a little less than a year of serious use, that I felt like I felt like literally a shell of a human. I remember looking at myself in the mirror and saying, like, who are you? Like, what? I literally didn't recognize the person looking back at me. And so, I mean, decades of that kind of a feeling, I cannot imagine feeling that way. I mean, it was quite simply impossible to live with. I would never wish that upon the feeling that I experienced, and the feeling I'm sure Andy experienced on, my worst enemy. I really wouldn't.
I think there's a big difference with the high potency stuff that you were using. Andy would not have been using that in the years that he was using. He died in 2014. So his was a longer and more gradual addiction. To where he probably was using daily. I'm sure he was using daily. But flower, I know it was flower bud because he showed it to me. So he was not using what you were using. And actually, I heard an addiction doctor say this. Well, maybe the high potency stuff is good because it will advance the disease so fast that the younger find they have to get into recovery. But it's so hard to get into recovery.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's really, that's so true though. Cause I was like, really, like it took me only like 8 months or, something like that to really be like, or 6 months. I was like, really of daily use of this stuff to get me to that point. Cause I was in the rooms and I'm hearing like drug addicts saying, they were on this for 30 years. I'm like, that would have been unbearable. 30 years. And I'm sure it wasn't bearable for 30 years, but totally. I mean, my downward spiral was like, it was insane. That was like the episode of The Twilight Zone. I was like a different person for 8 months. It was like crazy. So it really does accelerate it. I don't think it's necessarily a good thing, but I do see that perspective. But it's really hard for young people to get into recovery. I'm lucky. I feel lucky that I have a family that has experienced addiction, actually. I mean, unfortunately, right, for myself, because that probably led to me having my own problems. But I mean, my mom and my family really knew what to do. I mean, it's really, and I, honestly, I think it's just, I mean, I credit definitely my upbringing and trying to give me that strength and hope, but I think the thing that a lot of us credit, which is again, the 12 steps. I mean, the experience, strength and hope that you see people who have, I mean, I'm sure we all know that, I mean, the experiences are in many cases horrifying and jarring, and far more jarring than even my own. And it's and the fact that people can speak about, I mean, meeting people who served decades in prison, meeting people who have come from literally on the streets, and it makes me feel like, wow, like if I can definitely share my experience. So the last thing I'll say, yeah, thank you for Aubrey for hosting this, and everyone at Every Brain Matters. And I'm so happy to speak, and I'm happy to speak about this whenever anyone wants to have this discussion. So thank you so much.